The sound of the waves crashing against the sturdy hull of the longship is a constant companion. It is rhythmic, almost soothing, but beneath it lies the raw, unpredictable power of the ocean. Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a Viking ship, a vessel designed for speed, agility, and battle. The air smells of salt and brine, the sky overhead is an unbroken expanse of blue, and the land you once knew is now nothing more than a distant blur on the horizon. There are no maps to guide you, no satellites to track your progress. Just the open sea, vast and endless, stretching before you in all directions. You are bound to this fate, like the thousands of Viking sailors who ventured into these same unknown waters centuries ago, driven by ambition, a thirst for adventure, and the will to survive. For the Vikings, the sea was both a bridge and a barrier. It was a path to riches, to conquest, to new lands, and to the promise of glory. But it was also a realm of peril, one where the line between life and death was razor-thin. The voyages they embarked on were not just tests of skill and bravery, they were tests of endurance, of willpower, and of the human spirit. These were journeys into the unknown, made without the advantages we take for granted today, without modern navigational tools, without the comforts of clean water or sufficient food supplies. They sailed into a world where sickness, hunger, and the wrath of the elements could claim their lives at any moment. And yet, despite these hardships, the Vikings were among the most successful seafaring people in history. Their ships were marvels of engineering, their warriors were unparalleled in battle, and their ability to survive the hostile environment of the sea was a testament to their strength and ingenuity. But how did they do it? How did they sustain themselves for months at a time, eating, sleeping, and fighting on the open sea without succumbing to disease, fatigue, or starvation? How did they navigate vast expanses of water without the guidance of compasses or maps? How did they endure storms that could sink even the most advanced ships of their time? The answer lies not only in their physical resilience but also in their adaptability. The Vikings did not simply endure, they thrived. They learned to master their environment, to use what little they had to create systems of survival that allowed them to explore and conquer lands far beyond their homeland. They understood that to survive on the open sea, they had to be strategic in every aspect of their lives. From what they ate to how they slept, from the medicine they used to the discipline they maintained aboard ship. Each aspect of their existence was shaped by the harsh demands of the sea. They developed a survival ethos, an unspoken code, that ensured their success in these incredibly dangerous conditions. To understand how the Vikings managed to conquer the seas, we must first dive into the harsh realities they faced. Picture yourself again aboard one of their ships. The first thing you notice is the cold. The sea breeze cuts through your cloak, biting into your skin. It's not the sharp, invigorating cold of winter, but a damp, oppressive chill that seeps into your bones. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting long shadows across the water. There are no comforts here, no warm fires to gather around, no quiet nights spent under a roof. Just the constant movement of the ship, rocking with the waves, as the crew works tirelessly to keep it afloat. The men are lean, their faces weathered by years of exposure to the elements, their hands rough from handling the ship's ropes and oars. But their eyes are sharp, focused on the horizon, constantly scanning for any signs of land or danger. Every day is a fight for survival, every moment one of uncertainty. Yet amidst this chaos, there is a strange beauty in their determination. The Vikings had a deep connection to the sea, one that transcended mere survival. The ocean was not just a threat to be feared, but a challenge to be embraced. They were not just sailors, they were explorers, warriors, and craftsmen, all rolled into one. Their ships were the perfect manifestation of their relationship with the sea, sleek, fast, and deadly. But these ships were not just instruments of war, they were lifelines. They carried the Vikings across vast distances, connecting their scattered homelands in Scandinavia with far-off shores in Britain, Ireland, France, and even North America. Without these ships, there would have been no Viking Age, no legacy of conquest and exploration that still echoes through history today. But how did they achieve such mastery over the sea? What were the secrets behind their ability to eat, sleep, and fight at sea without dying from disease or exhaustion? In many ways, the answer lies in their approach to life itself. The Vikings understood that survival at sea was a delicate balance. They knew they had to be prepared for everything, from the food they ate to the way they slept, from the tools they carried to the rituals they performed. The Vikings were not just surviving, they were adapting. They had to make use of every resource at their disposal, every scrap of knowledge, and every ounce of strength to stay alive on those long voyages. As we delve deeper into the Vikings' world, we will uncover the intricacies of how they made these extraordinary feats possible. We will examine their diet, their sleeping arrangements, and their combat strategies, learning how they overcame the immense challenges of living at sea for months at a time. We will discover the secrets of their survival, how they prevented disease, how they fought off hunger, and how they maintained their physical and mental strength amidst the unforgiving waves. And we will explore how, in the face of overwhelming odds, the Vikings rose to become the most formidable seafaring people the world had ever known. The journey that the Vikings undertook was not for the faint of heart. It was a voyage into the unknown, where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. And yet, they did it, not just once, but time and time again, crossing vast stretches of water and establishing a network of settlements that stretched from the icy shores of the North Atlantic to the warm lands of the Mediterranean. Their success was not simply due to their strength in battle or their skill as sailors, but to their ability to adapt, innovate, and persevere in the face of challenges that would have broken most others. This was the spirit of the Viking seafarer, a spirit that would endure long after the Viking Age itself had faded into history. As we set sail on this journey through the world of the Vikings, we will witness their incredible feats of survival, their triumphs and their trials. And we will begin to understand how the Vikings ate, slept, and fought at sea, not just to survive, but to thrive. This is their story, one of resilience, courage, and the unyielding drive to conquer the seas. It is a story that continues to capture our imagination, centuries after the last Viking longships sailed into the horizon. The Viking Age, a period that spanned from roughly the 8th to the 11th century, remains one of the most captivating and enigmatic chapters in history. The Vikings, often portrayed in modern media as mere raiders and pillagers, were in fact some of the most skilled and daring sailors the world has ever known. Their mastery of the seas was not simply the result of good fortune or brute strength. It was the product of innovation, precision, and an unparalleled understanding of the natural world. To understand how they came to dominate the seas, we must first look at the people behind the ships, the Vikings themselves. Viking society was built around a deep connection to the sea. For the people of Scandinavia, who lived in what are now Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, the sea was not a barrier but a conduit. It was their lifeline, providing them with the means to trade, to travel, and to conquer. The fjords that dotted the coastline were the perfect breeding grounds for shipbuilding, with the timber from the surrounding forests offering the material to create vessels that were not only strong but agile. These ships, the longships, would become synonymous with Viking exploration, trade, and warfare. They were the heart of Viking seafaring culture and the key to their extraordinary success on the water. Imagine standing at the edge of a fjord in the early morning light, the mist rising from the water as the first rays of the sun reflect off the surface. There, on the shore, you would see the longships, sleek, narrow vessels designed for speed and flexibility. These ships were unlike anything that had been seen before. Unlike the bulky, slow ships of their contemporaries, Viking longships were built to cut through the water with ease, their shallow hulls allowing them to navigate both open seas and shallow rivers. They could be rowed with great speed, powered by up to 30 oars on each side, and they could reach speeds of up to 15 knots, a remarkable feat for their time. The longship was not just a vessel, it was a symbol of Viking power, ingenuity, and the relentless drive to explore and conquer new territories. But what made these ships so remarkable was not just their speed or design, it was their versatility. Viking longships could be sailed across the open ocean, navigating vast distances with incredible precision, but they could also be rowed into rivers and along coastlines, where larger ships could not follow. The shallow draft of the longship allowed it to slip easily in and out of harbors, giving the Vikings a strategic advantage in their raids. This ability to adapt to different types of terrain was key to their success as seafarers. Whether they were embarking on a raid along the coasts of England, settling in the fertile lands of Normandy, or exploring the frigid waters of North America, the longship was the perfect vehicle for the Viking way of life. However, the Vikings were not merely good shipbuilders, they were also skilled navigators. The open sea was a daunting, unfamiliar realm, and to venture into it required a deep understanding of the natural world. The Vikings had no compasses, no maps, and no formal navigation systems like we have today. Instead, they relied on a combination of natural landmarks, the position of the sun, the stars, and the currents to guide them. They were experts at reading the sky, using the sun's position to estimate direction and time of day. At night, they would navigate by the stars, using the North Star as a fixed point of reference. In addition, they developed a keen sense of the wind and the ocean currents, allowing them to predict weather patterns and plan their routes accordingly. This ability to navigate without the aid of modern technology was nothing short of extraordinary. It was a skill passed down through generations, honed by years of experience on the water. The Vikings' seafaring expertise was not limited to their ships and navigation. They were also exceptional sailors, capable of handling their vessels under the most challenging conditions. The sea, as anyone who has spent time on it knows, is a harsh and unpredictable environment. Storms can appear without warning, waves can rise to towering heights, and the wind can shift in an instant, making navigation treacherous. Yet, despite the constant dangers, the Vikings thrived on the sea. They developed advanced techniques for dealing with the elements, from managing the sails in strong winds to using the ships designed to minimize the impact of waves. They were experts in weather patterns, knowing when to set sail and when to stay put. This ability to read and react to the conditions of the sea gave them a significant advantage over other seafaring peoples of the time. In addition to their sailing and navigational prowess, the Vikings were also fearless warriors. To be a Viking meant to embrace a warrior ethos, and this was as true on the water as it was on land. The Viking ship was a vessel of war, designed not only for transportation but for battle. The longships were equipped with rows of sharp, menacing shields along their sides, and their sleek, narrow design made them perfect for raiding. When the Vikings sailed into foreign shores, they did not approach cautiously or tentatively, they arrived with speed and precision, often striking before their enemies had time to react. The Vikings were not just warriors, they were masters of surprise and intimidation, capable of launching brutal, lightning-fast raids that left little time for defense. But the Viking mastery of the sea went beyond their ability to fight. They were also brilliant traders and explorers, and their ships were the vehicles that allowed them to establish trade routes across vast distances. From the British Isles to the Mediterranean, from the shores of North America to the rivers of Russia, the Vikings established a network of trade and exploration that spanned continents. They traded in everything from silver and furs to slaves and weapons, and they were instrumental in establishing the foundations of a global trade network that would continue to evolve for centuries. Their longships became symbols of wealth and power, enabling them to connect distant cultures and exchange goods, ideas, and technologies. The Vikings' dominance of the seas was not the result of a single factor but rather the confluence of their skill, innovation, and audacity. Their ships, navigation techniques, and warrior culture all contributed to their success as seafarers, and together they allowed the Vikings to achieve feats that seemed impossible for their time. They did not merely survive the sea, they mastered it. The sea became their domain, a realm in which they were free to explore, conquer, and thrive. This mastery of the water was not just about physical strength, it was about a mindset, a way of life. The Vikings were defined by their relationship with the sea, and this relationship shaped their culture, their values, and their very identity. As we continue our journey through the world of the Vikings, we will see how their mastery of the sea extended far beyond the ships themselves. We will discover how their unique approach to life, one that combined courage, adaptability, and an intimate knowledge of the natural world, allowed them to achieve what no other civilization of their time could. The sea was their canvas, and on it, they painted a story of exploration, conquest, and survival that continues to captivate our imaginations to this day. The open sea, vast and indifferent, was both the greatest ally and the most fearsome foe the Vikings would ever encounter. Unlike the sheltered fjords or the calm rivers that bordered their homeland, the open ocean presented challenges that demanded every ounce of skill, courage, and adaptability from the Vikings. Here, in the uncharted waters beyond the safety of land, the Vikings were forced to confront the raw power of nature in all its fury. To survive in these conditions required more than just a strong ship or sharp weapons. It required an intimate understanding of the sea, an unshakable resilience in the face of danger, and a deep respect for the unpredictable forces that govern the natural world. The sea was both a gateway to new worlds and a graveyard for the unprepared. Vikings did not simply sail for trade or conquest. They sailed into the unknown, often venturing to distant lands where no one had gone before. But the further they sailed, the more they exposed themselves to the risks of nature. From sudden storms to fierce winds and treacherous currents, the dangers of the open sea were constant. One day could be calm and clear, the next could bring a storm powerful enough to swallow a ship whole. This unpredictability was a part of the Viking experience, a reminder that no matter how skilled a sailor you were, the ocean remained a powerful and capricious force that could change your fate in an instant. Imagine yourself on board one of those Viking longships, a sleek, fast vessel that can cut through the water with the speed of a predator. The sun is high, and the wind is at your back. For now, the sea is your ally, helping you reach distant shores with speed and ease. But even on such a perfect day, there is no guarantee that calm weather will last. A sudden shift in wind direction can turn a smooth sailing day into a nightmare. Without the modern conveniences of weather forecasts or navigational aids, the Vikings had to rely on their instincts and experience to survive. They knew that the ocean could be calm one moment and deadly the next. And when the storm came, it came without warning. One of the most feared aspects of Viking voyages was the sudden appearance of violent storms. These tempests could arise from nowhere, sending towering waves crashing over the sides of the ships, threatening to capsize even the most skillfully crafted vessels. The Vikings, however, were no strangers to such chaos. They had been raised in a land where fierce winds and rainstorms were a part of daily life. Their ships, with their low, narrow hulls and high prow, were designed to ride the waves rather than fight against them. Yet even the finest longship was no match for the fury of nature when it unleashed its full force. Viking sailors had a deep understanding of the weather and its signs, which they used to predict storms before they arrived. By observing the clouds, the wind, and the behavior of the sea, they could sometimes anticipate what was coming. If the clouds began to turn dark and ominous, if the wind shifted abruptly, they knew it was time to brace for a storm. These storms were not just an inconvenience, they were a matter of life and death. If a ship was caught unprepared, with sails up and the crew unaware, the storm could easily overwhelm them. The fear of being struck by a rogue wave or of being caught in the middle of a squall with no safe haven in sight was a constant anxiety for the Vikings. And it wasn't just the storms that posed a danger. The sea itself, with its unpredictable tides and treacherous currents, was an obstacle that the Vikings had to navigate with incredible skill. When the Vikings set out on a journey, they were not only battling the wind and weather, but also the natural flow of the sea. Strong currents could carry a ship far off course, making it difficult to find land or reach a desired destination. The Vikings were masters of using these currents to their advantage, but they were also aware of the danger that came with relying too heavily on them. A strong current could take a ship into dangerous waters, away from the safety of the coastline, and into the heart of the open ocean where they could easily become lost. The Vikings were also keenly aware of the hazards presented by the sea creatures that lurked beneath the surface. While tales of sea monsters are often the stuff of myth, the reality of the deep sea was frightening enough. The waters of the North Atlantic, in particular, were home to creatures such as whales, sharks, and giant squid. While these creatures were not likely to attack Viking ships directly, they represented the unknown dangers that lurked beneath the waves. The Vikings often spoke of the sea as a realm of mystery, one where anything could happen, where the waters could turn hostile in an instant, and where the line between life and death was blurred. Perhaps one of the most insidious dangers of the open sea was the slow, creeping threat of sickness. Disease could spread rapidly on long voyages, where space was cramped and sanitation was minimal. Scurvy, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin C, was a constant concern for sailors. For the Vikings, fresh fruits and vegetables were scarce on the open ocean, and the limited food stores they carried could only provide so much sustenance. Even with the preservation techniques they used, salting, drying, and smoking meat and fish, there was little to prevent the onset of disease once the crew had been at sea for extended periods. Yet the Vikings were not entirely unprepared for this threat. They had a wealth of herbal knowledge passed down through generations, using a variety of plants to treat ailments and prevent disease. They carried medicinal herbs such as garlic, juniper, and yarrow, all of which were believed to have healing properties. These herbs were not just used for treating illness, they were also a part of the Vikings' overall strategy for maintaining their health at sea. They understood that survival was not just about fighting storms or navigating the waves. It was about managing the risks of disease, exhaustion, and injury. Despite the constant threats they faced, the Vikings never allowed the dangers of the sea to deter them. Instead, they embraced the challenge, viewing each peril as a test of their strength and resilience. The sea was not just an obstacle to be overcome, it was a proving ground, a place where the Vikings could demonstrate their skill and endurance. They knew that only by mastering the elements could they hope to conquer the world beyond their shores. The open ocean was not a place for the faint-hearted. It was a place for those who were willing to face danger head-on, to push forward in the face of uncertainty, and to take risks in the pursuit of glory and survival. In many ways, the Viking relationship with the sea was a metaphor for their entire way of life. It was defined by a combination of fearlessness and respect, strength and adaptability. They did not simply endure the open ocean, they conquered it. And as they sailed into the unknown, they carried with them the knowledge that the sea was a force to be reckoned with, but also a force that could be tamed by those who had the courage, the skill, and the will to face it. Their mastery of the elements was not just a matter of physical strength, it was a testament to their understanding of the world around them and their unyielding determination to survive and thrive, no matter the odds. The vastness of the ocean with its boundless horizons is both a source of awe and a symbol of the unpredictable challenges that the Vikings had to face during their long voyages. A sailor, surrounded only by water, is often at the mercy of the elements, and this was especially true for the Vikings as they crossed treacherous waters, journeying across vast distances that could stretch for months. But of all the challenges they faced, the most basic, and arguably most crucial, was ensuring that their crew had enough food to survive. Without sufficient food, their voyages would have been doomed from the start. The Vikings, therefore, had to be extremely resourceful, relying on a carefully prepared and well-considered diet to keep them alive and healthy throughout their journeys. Before embarking on a voyage, careful thought went into what food could be stored, preserved, and carried aboard the longships. Unlike the fertile lands of Scandinavia, where rivers and lakes provided ample fresh fish and game, the sea itself offered little in terms of nutrition. Vikings were expert hunters, farmers, and fishermen, but out on the open water, those skills had limited use. The answer to the question of sustenance lay in the careful preparation and preservation of food. Vikings had learned to preserve food in ways that would allow it to last for months without spoiling. Salting, drying, smoking, and fermenting were all vital methods employed to keep food fresh for the duration of their voyages. Salted fish was the staple of the Viking diet at sea. The long, cold winters of Scandinavia had taught them how to preserve fish in ways that would make it edible for months at a time. Cod, herring, and other fish were caught in abundance in the northern waters, cleaned, salted, and packed into barrels. Salt was scarce and highly valued, but the Vikings knew its importance in preserving food, and they carried it in large quantities on their ships. Salted fish could be rehydrated and cooked when needed, providing a steady source of protein. It wasn't a particularly appetizing meal, but it was enough to keep a crew of Viking warriors and sailors fed when nothing else was available. Alongside salted fish, dried meat, usually pork or beef, was also an essential part of the Vikings' maritime diet. Like their fish, the meat was salted and dried to keep it from spoiling. Vikings were expert butchers, skilled in the art of preserving animal products for long-term storage. Dried meat was tough and not easy to chew, but it was durable and reliable. This, along with salted fish, provided a steady source of protein and calories during the long voyages across the ocean. In addition to protein, the Vikings needed carbohydrates to fuel their long hours of rowing, navigating, and fighting. Rye, barley, and oats were commonly used in Viking diets, and these grains were often ground into flour and baked into hard, dense bread. The bread, known as snegel or broad, was tough and dry, made to withstand the rigors of travel. It wasn't the kind of bread one would expect to find in a warm bakery, but it served its purpose. It provided sustenance that could last for weeks or even months without spoiling. The Vikings also carried dried porridge, a mixture of grains that could be boiled with water to make a nourishing meal when fresh supplies were running low. But the Vikings didn't just rely on grains and salted foods. They also carried fermented foods to ensure that they had a source of vitamins, especially the crucial vitamin C, which was vital for preventing scurvy. Fermented dairy products like buttermilk, whey, and cheese were staples of the Viking diet. These foods not only provided essential nutrients but also helped with digestion, especially when the body was under the stress of long hours on the open sea. In the absence of fresh vegetables and fruits, fermented dairy helped to keep the Vikings' gut health in check, even as they sailed into uncharted waters. In addition to dairy, they carried dried fruits, particularly apples, which could be stored for long periods without spoiling. These fruits provided some much-needed variety to the diet, breaking the monotony of salted meat and fish. For Vikings, eating fresh fruit during the long voyages was a luxury, but it was a luxury they would sometimes indulge in, especially if they could find fruits or berries along the shores they visited. The careful preservation of food was not just about nutrition, it was also about maximizing the limited space on board the longships. The ships were small, and space was precious. The Viking longship, while magnificent in design, was not a luxury cruise liner. It was a tool for survival, and everything aboard had a purpose. The long, narrow hold of the ship was filled with barrels of salted fish, dried meats, and grains, but there was little room for excess. The Vikings had to plan their provisions with meticulous care, ensuring that they had just enough to survive without overloading the ship with unnecessary weight. Despite these careful preparations, food was not always abundant during a Viking voyage. The limited stores often led to a state of constant hunger, especially if the crew encountered storms that lasted for days or weeks. Provisions were rationed carefully, and food became a precious commodity. The mental and physical toll of living on such limited supplies was immense. Hunger was a constant companion, and it often led to the depletion of morale and energy. Yet the Vikings were not just passive recipients of whatever food they could scavenge. They were masters of making do with what they had. On some voyages, they would supplement their diet with whatever they could catch from the sea. Fishing became a vital activity during lulls in the voyage, where the crew would cast nets or lines to catch fish, providing some welcome variety to their otherwise monotonous diet. If they landed on an island, they would forage for berries, herbs, and any edible plants they could find. Hunting, though not always feasible on a ship, would occasionally be possible if they could land on more fertile shores. The ability to adapt was essential for survival. The Vikings didn't simply stick to a rigid, predetermined menu, they made use of what was available. If they found a rich fishing ground or an island teeming with wildlife, they would seize the opportunity to gather as much fresh food as possible before setting sail again. Despite these hardships, the Vikings' approach to food and nutrition was revolutionary for its time. Their ability to preserve food through salting, drying, and fermenting gave them a flexibility and self-sufficiency that few other seafaring peoples could match. They understood the necessity of planning ahead and prepared their provisions in a way that ensured they had the energy and strength to endure long voyages. But their ingenuity didn't stop at preserving food, they also knew how to make the most of their limited resources. As we continue our exploration of Viking life at sea, it becomes clear that food was more than just a means of survival, it was an essential part of the Viking identity. Their resourcefulness and adaptability in the face of adversity allowed them to venture further and longer than most other peoples of their time. And while their diet may seem monotonous and unvaried by today's standards, it was a testament to the Vikings' ability to survive in a world where the sea could be both a provider and a taker. The Viking way of life at sea, including their approach to food, was about resilience, ingenuity, and a deep understanding of how to survive in one of the most inhospitable environments imaginable. It was this mastery of survival that allowed them to thrive on the open ocean and embark on some of the most daring and successful voyages in history. The relentless motion of the sea is a constant, unyielding force, and on a Viking longship, that motion is never truly still. Whether it's a gentle sway or the violent pitch of a storm, the ship moves with the rhythm of the waves, carrying its crew on a journey that could span weeks, if not months. For those aboard, this constant rocking becomes a way of life, a necessary rhythm in which survival is tied not only to strength and skill but also to rest. Sleeping aboard a Viking longship was not a simple task. It required an extraordinary level of endurance and adaptability, and it had to be woven seamlessly into the daily rhythms of the ship, where every task was essential to the overall survival of the crew. Imagine the scene. The creak of the wooden hull groaning as the ship rolls with the waves. The wind whips through the sails, and the oarsmen below deck must keep in time with the rhythm of the sea. The ship is crowded, with sailors, warriors, and traders huddled together in close quarters. There are no luxuries here, no soft beds or warm rooms. Instead, there are rough blankets, the smell of salt water, and the constant sway of the ship beneath your body. Sleeping in such conditions requires a mental toughness that few could understand. The Vikings did not sleep like we do today, in warm, dry beds, with the comfort of pillows or the security of knowing that the world outside is still. Their rest was a pragmatic necessity, born out of the understanding that sleep was critical to maintaining the strength and endurance required to navigate such a perilous environment. Space aboard a Viking longship was at a premium. The ships, though marvels of engineering, were built primarily for speed and function, not comfort. Below deck, the crew would sleep in close quarters, each man finding whatever space he could, whether that was lying on the wooden floor, leaning against the hull, or curling up next to others. The lower deck, though often referred to as the sleeping quarters, was not designed for rest in the way we might think. It was a place where sailors, warriors, and traders shared space in cramped conditions, with little room for personal comfort. There was no separation between work and sleep. If you weren't working to row, steer, or maintain the ship, you were sleeping, quickly and often in shifts, so that the ship could continue its journey without pause. The concept of a good night's sleep was far from the Viking experience. Their rest was punctuated by the needs of the ship. The ship itself had its demands: the shifting winds, the shifting sails, the constant vigilance required to avoid storms or navigate through treacherous waters. A ship at sea was a living entity, and the crew was bound to it, not only by necessity but by a deep, almost spiritual bond with the sea. This was a relationship of mutual dependence. Without the ship, they could not survive. Without the crew, the ship could not sail. The physical toll of sleeping under such circumstances was immense. The human body is not naturally attuned to the constant, unpredictable sway of the ocean. While many sailors today struggle to sleep on rocking boats, the Vikings, who spent months at sea, learned to adapt. Their bodies grew accustomed to the rhythm of the ship, but it was no easy feat for the average Viking. Sleep was a commodity that had to be earned through exhaustion. Only when the body was so worn down by the ceaseless work of rowing, steering, and navigating would it allow for rest. Viking crews had to make do with what they had. The bedding was sparse, consisting of woolen blankets or furs, necessary insulation against the cold that could become unbearable at night. The Vikings had a deep understanding of the harsh conditions at sea, and they used what resources were available to protect themselves from the elements. If it was cold, they huddled together for warmth, sharing body heat as they lay on the bare wooden planks. These makeshift sleeping arrangements were designed for practicality, not comfort. The furs and blankets helped shield the sailors from the biting cold of the night air, which could dip into freezing temperatures even in the summer months. For many, the experience of sleeping aboard the longship became an exercise in endurance, in learning to rest when it was necessary, regardless of how uncomfortable or unsettling the conditions were. Despite the difficulties, the Vikings understood the importance of rest. The need for sleep was as critical to their survival as the food they ate or the skill with which they fought. Without sleep, there could be no strength, and without strength, there could be no survival. The crew had to rest in shifts, with one group taking the night watch while another slept. This system allowed the longship to continue its voyage without interruption. Those who slept were not free from responsibility. They remained alert, listening to the creak of the ship and the roar of the waves, ready to jump into action at a moment's notice. Even in their sleep, the crew had to remain attuned to the needs of the ship. For a Viking, sleep was an exercise in resilience. There was no luxury in sleep, no indulgence in the comfort of a soft pillow or a quiet room. There was only the ship, the waves, the sky, and the ever-present awareness that their journey could end at any moment. Yet, despite the harshness of their environment, sleep was a necessary reprieve, a brief escape from the physical and mental demands of the voyage. In those precious moments of rest, the Vikings found solace, knowing that without it, they would not have the strength to carry on. The Vikings were also known for their sense of discipline, which extended even to their rest. There was an unspoken rhythm to the way they slept, dictated by the needs of the ship and the environment around them. If they were in the midst of a storm, sleep was rare. The crew would be called upon to fight the elements, to man the oars, to steady the ship, or to weather the storm as best they could. But in calmer waters, when the winds had died down and the ship glided peacefully through the waves, the crew could steal moments of sleep in between their tasks. The mental and emotional toll of sleeping on the open sea should not be underestimated. The Vikings, much like their modern counterparts, had to contend with the isolation of being far from home, with the knowledge that they were venturing into unknown waters, often with little understanding of what lay ahead. The constant motion of the ship, the sounds of the waves crashing against the hull, and the ever-present sense of danger created an atmosphere that was at once exhilarating and unnerving. Sleep aboard the longship, therefore, was not just about physical rest. It was about managing fear, uncertainty, and the knowledge that survival was never guaranteed. In many ways, sleeping on the longship represented the larger Viking mindset, one that balanced necessity with resilience, discomfort with endurance. The Vikings understood that the sea was unpredictable, and they embraced this fact. To survive on the open ocean, they had to be as adaptable in their sleep as they were in their daily work. There was no room for luxury, no time for excessive comfort. The Viking longship was a vessel of survival, and every aspect of life aboard it, from rowing to eating, from fighting to sleeping, was shaped by the harsh reality of life at sea. In the end, the ability to sleep aboard the longship, despite the physical discomforts and constant motion, was a testament to the Viking crew's mental fortitude. It was their capacity to endure, to rest when rest was needed, and to wake up when the call to action came. It was this extraordinary ability to persevere through exhaustion, discomfort, and uncertainty that allowed the Vikings to thrive on the open ocean, conquering the seas and carving out a legacy that would echo through history. The sea, for all its beauty and majesty, was also a realm of constant danger. For the Vikings, it was not just a highway for exploration and trade, but a battlefield. The Viking longship, sleek and swift, was as much a weapon of war as it was a vessel for transport. Fighting at sea was an integral part of their culture and way of life. It was a realm where warriors had to be constantly alert, where a battle could erupt in a matter of moments, and where survival meant not only outmaneuvering nature but also conquering rivals on the waves. The act of fighting at sea was unlike anything experienced on land. On the open ocean, there were no fortifications, no safety of high walls or well-established battlegrounds. It was a fight that could be won or lost in the space of a few heartbeats, with lives hanging in the balance as Viking warriors faced not only each other but the immense power of the sea itself. The Viking longship was designed for this very purpose, to be fast, agile, and lethal in combat. With its shallow draft, it could navigate into shallow harbors, along coastlines, and up rivers, catching enemies off guard before retreating into open water. The longship was the perfect tool for surprise raids, which were a hallmark of Viking warfare. To understand combat at sea, one must first consider the unique challenges the Vikings faced. Unlike battles fought on land, where armies could form ranks, use shields for defense, and rely on their size to overwhelm their opponents, naval combat required a different kind of strategy. At sea, there was no room for error. No safe place to retreat, no well-established lines of defense. Everything had to be done quickly, decisively, and with precision. For the Vikings, every raid was an opportunity to test their strength and cunning, and every encounter on the water was a chance to prove their superiority. The Viking longship was a warrior's ship. Its design was perfectly suited for combat, with a narrow, flexible hull that could slice through the water at high speeds. Each ship carried a complement of rowers, who could propel the vessel with powerful strokes, allowing it to move faster than most ships of the time. The longship was often armed with a variety of weapons, spears, axes, and swords, kept on board for when combat became inevitable. But perhaps the most intimidating weapon was the ship itself. The prow of the Viking longship was often adorned with a fierce animal head, typically that of a dragon or serpent, designed not only to strike fear into the hearts of enemies but to represent the warrior spirit of the Vikings. It was a symbol of their readiness to fight, to conquer, and to survive. Naval combat for the Vikings often began with a sudden and ferocious assault. The longships would close in on their target quickly, taking advantage of their speed and maneuverability to launch a surprise attack. When they approached a rival ship or a coastal settlement, the Vikings would first attempt to overwhelm their opponents with sheer speed and shock. They would approach their target swiftly, often under the cover of darkness or with the sun at their backs, and board the enemy vessel with terrifying speed. Boarding was a hallmark of Viking naval combat. Once within striking distance, the Vikings would leap onto the enemy ship, weapons in hand, ready to fight in close quarters. The goal was not just to destroy the ship, but to capture it, allowing the Vikings to claim it as their own and use it for future raids. Fighting on board a ship was chaotic, intense, and brutal. There was no room for hesitation. The narrow space on the deck made it difficult for warriors to use their full range of movement, so combat was often fought at close range, with axes swinging and swords flashing in the dim light. Each Viking was trained to fight in this environment, to move quickly and decisively. Warriors on the longship were typically armed with axes, which were the primary weapon in Viking raids. The axe was a versatile tool, equally effective for chopping, cutting, and thrusting. It could be wielded with one hand or two, depending on the situation, and was ideal for combat in confined spaces. In addition to axes, Vikings carried spears, swords, and shields, all of which were used depending on the situation. Spears were primarily used for throwing, allowing the Vikings to attack their enemies from a distance before closing the gap for close combat. Swords, although less common than axes, were prized for their sharpness and cutting power. Shields, often round and made from wood, were used both for defense and as weapons themselves. In naval combat, they formed a line of defense that helped protect the warriors as they engaged the enemy. The tactical strategies of Viking sea battles were based on both surprise and speed. When two ships met on the water, the Vikings would often use a tactic called fighting in the wake, which involved using the ship's wake to mask their approach. The Vikings would time their attack to catch their enemies off guard, using the noise of the wake and the movement of the waves to cover the sound of their own ship's approach. When the time came, they would unleash a swift assault, overwhelming their opponents with speed and violence. The Vikings relied on their ability to board enemy ships quickly and efficiently, often taking prisoners to ransom or using the captured vessels for future raids. But it wasn't just about raw combat skills. The Vikings also knew how to use the sea to their advantage. They understood wind patterns, tides, and currents, and used these natural forces to gain the upper hand. In some cases, the Vikings would engage in what was essentially a battle of attrition, using the wind and tides to outmaneuver their enemies. They could strike at the heart of enemy territories, land their forces quickly, and retreat just as swiftly, leaving little time for the enemy to react. The Vikings also relied heavily on the element of surprise. Many of their raids were carried out at night, with the longships slipping silently across the water under the cover of darkness. With their stealthy approach, they could catch their enemies off guard, launching attacks before the defenders had time to organize a proper defense. This tactic of surprise was a hallmark of Viking warfare, and it was one that gave them a significant advantage over their enemies. Despite their ruthlessness, Viking raiders were also skilled traders. After a successful raid, they often returned to their longships, laden with plunder, including gold, silver, and other valuable commodities. These goods were then traded at markets across Europe, spreading Viking influence and wealth far beyond their homelands. However, even as traders, the Vikings never abandoned their martial nature. Whether on a raid or a trade mission, the Viking warrior was always prepared for combat, ever ready to defend their goods and their honor. Combat at sea was not just a matter of strategy and weaponry, it was a test of endurance and willpower. Every battle fought at sea required not only physical strength and skill but the mental toughness to endure the hardships of the environment. The sea itself was an unforgiving opponent. The constant motion of the waves, the saltwater spraying across the deck, the harsh winds, all of these elements made combat at sea even more difficult. Yet, the Vikings, with their seafaring prowess and warrior spirit, faced these challenges head-on, using every tool at their disposal to emerge victorious. In the end, Viking combat at sea was a fusion of tactics, strength, and resilience. It was a brutal, fast-paced form of warfare that relied on the Vikings' mastery of their ships, the sea, and their weapons. The Viking longship was not just a means of transportation, it was a weapon that embodied the very essence of Viking warfare, a symbol of their ability to conquer the seas and emerge victorious, no matter the odds. And in the chaos of battle, amidst the roar of waves and the clash of steel, the Vikings proved time and again that they were unmatched warriors, capable of facing any enemy and surviving the most brutal of conditions. The Viking Age, though lasting only a few centuries, left an indelible mark on the history of Europe and the wider world. Their dominance of the seas, their mastery of longship design, and their unparalleled skills in navigation and warfare shaped not just their time but the future of seafaring cultures for generations to come. The legacy of the Vikings is deeply embedded in maritime history, influencing everything from shipbuilding to exploration and even naval tactics that would be utilized by future civilizations. The Viking longship, a symbol of both craftsmanship and military prowess, became a precursor to future naval innovations, and the Vikings' adventurous spirit and maritime expertise sparked a chain of exploration that would reshape the world. To understand the Viking naval legacy, one must first consider the profound impact their longships had on the development of future vessels. The longship was a technological marvel for its time, built with advanced shipbuilding techniques that allowed it to navigate through both open seas and shallow rivers with ease. Its design was lean and efficient, providing a combination of speed, maneuverability, and strength. The Vikings' understanding of hydrodynamics and their use of lightweight, flexible materials gave the longship the ability to cut through water at remarkable speeds, a feat that many other ships of the time could not match. The longship was designed for versatility. It could be rowed, sailed, or navigated by the wind, depending on the needs of the crew and the conditions of the sea. As the Vikings ventured farther and farther from their homelands, their longships allowed them to explore distant lands, trade with far-off civilizations, and raid coastal settlements with lightning speed. It was the longship that enabled the Vikings to dominate the waters of Europe, from the British Isles to the Mediterranean and even as far as North America. These ships were not only used for combat but also for trade and exploration. The Vikings' ability to travel vast distances with these ships opened up new trade routes, fostered cultural exchanges, and laid the groundwork for the age of exploration that would come centuries later. The Viking longship's influence on shipbuilding can still be seen today, though it has been adapted and refined over the centuries. The principles behind the longship, speed, agility, and versatility, continue to inform modern naval design. Even the iconic long, narrow hulls of modern-day naval vessels can trace their origins to Viking ships. The Vikings, by mastering the art of shipbuilding and using it for both war and exploration, created a legacy that influenced later maritime cultures, from the medieval period through the Renaissance and into the Age of Exploration. The ships of the great explorers, like Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama, were built on principles that had been pioneered by the Vikings. Beyond the ships themselves, the Vikings also left a lasting imprint on naval tactics. The Viking strategy of quick, decisive raids was revolutionary, and it became a model for naval warfare in later centuries. Their ability to strike quickly, without warning, and to escape just as swiftly was a game-changer in warfare. The Vikings did not engage in prolonged sieges or battles of attrition. Instead, they relied on surprise, speed, and precision to overwhelm their enemies. This approach to warfare would influence later naval tactics, especially in the development of modern guerrilla tactics and fast, stealthy military engagements. The Vikings also set the stage for the global expansion of maritime trade. By establishing far-reaching trade routes, they opened up exchanges between East and West, from the bustling markets of Constantinople to the shores of North America. The Vikings traded in commodities ranging from furs and timber to precious metals and slaves, creating a network that linked distant cultures and societies. This network would later expand as other civilizations sought to emulate the Vikings' success in trade, further cementing the importance of seafaring in global commerce. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of the Viking naval legacy is the spirit of exploration that they embodied. The Vikings were not just raiders or traders, they were pioneers. Their voyages were driven by a deep curiosity about the world beyond their homeland. They were the first Europeans to reach North America, centuries before Columbus set sail. Leif Erikson, the son of the legendary Viking explorer Eric the Red, is often credited with landing in North America around the year 1000, well before other explorers followed in his wake. This bold exploration, fueled by a desire to discover new lands and resources, laid the groundwork for the subsequent waves of exploration that would change the course of history. The Viking spirit of exploration was not confined to the physical realm. Their seafaring ventures also led to a blending of cultures, with Viking settlements established in the British Isles, Normandy, and parts of Eastern Europe. The Vikings interacted with the local populations, exchanging goods, ideas, and customs. These interactions helped to shape the cultural landscape of the regions they visited. In Normandy, for example, the Viking settlement would eventually give rise to the Normans, who would go on to conquer England in 1066, leaving another enduring mark on European history. Even in the centuries following the Viking Age, their influence remained evident. The legacy of Viking exploration can be seen in the subsequent voyages of discovery that defined the age of exploration. The navigational skills, shipbuilding techniques, and adventurous spirit of the Vikings inspired future generations of explorers to venture beyond the known world. The likes of Christopher Columbus, Ferdinand Magellan, and Vasco da Gama were all inspired by the spirit of exploration that the Vikings had ignited, although their methods and tools were far more advanced. The Vikings' influence on navigation also cannot be overstated. Their ability to navigate vast distances without the benefit of modern instruments such as compasses or maps was a feat of remarkable skill. They relied on the stars, the sun, the wind, and the natural landmarks around them to find their way. Viking navigators would use a combination of oral tradition and practical knowledge passed down through generations to steer their ships across open seas. This kind of navigation was an art form, based on observation and experience rather than technology. Even as modern navigational tools began to emerge, the principles that guided Viking sailors remained relevant. As Europe entered the age of exploration, the impact of Viking navigation methods became clear. The development of tools like the compass and astrolabe built upon the techniques that had been honed by the Vikings centuries earlier. The navigational knowledge passed down by the Vikings laid the foundation for the voyages of Columbus, Magellan, and others who would later reshape the map of the world. In Scandinavia, the Viking legacy is still deeply felt. The reverence for their seafaring ancestors can be seen in the region's continued focus on maritime activities. Scandinavian countries have long been known for their shipbuilding traditions, and even today, countries like Norway maintain a robust naval presence, reflecting the enduring influence of Viking shipbuilders. The Viking longship, which once sailed to distant lands and brought back riches and tales of adventure, is now an iconic symbol of national pride, representing a culture that conquered the seas and expanded its influence far beyond its homeland. Moreover, the Viking legacy is not just confined to the realm of exploration and warfare, it also lives on in modern culture. Their tales of bravery, their voyages of discovery, and their audacity in the face of the unknown continue to captivate the imagination. In literature, film, and television, the Vikings are often portrayed as fearless adventurers and warriors, a testament to the enduring fascination with their exploits on the high seas. Even in the modern age, the Viking Age continues to inspire a sense of adventure and the desire to push beyond the boundaries of what is known. In conclusion, the Viking naval legacy is a multifaceted one, shaped by their shipbuilding innovations, their mastery of navigation, and their bold spirit of exploration. The longships that once carried the Vikings across oceans and into foreign lands are symbolic of a culture that shaped the course of history, paving the way for future generations of explorers and traders. From their influence on naval design to their lasting impact on global exploration and trade, the Vikings left a profound imprint on the world, one that still resonates today. Through their mastery of the sea, they not only conquered vast stretches of land but also helped to chart the course of human history, laying the groundwork for the maritime world that would emerge in the centuries to come. Their legacy endures, not just in the ships they built or the lands they conquered, but in the spirit of exploration and adventure that they left behind. Viking society was built on a delicate balance of hierarchy, cooperation, and shared responsibility. While much of the focus on Viking life tends to gravitate toward their warrior culture and their seafaring exploits, the true strength of the Vikings lay in the complex social structure that governed every aspect of their lives, particularly when it came to their seafaring ventures. For the Vikings, the sea was both a realm of opportunity and peril, and how they organized themselves on board their longships played a crucial role in their ability to conquer distant lands, establish trade routes, and maintain their reputation as formidable warriors. To understand the dynamics of Viking seafaring communities, it is essential to first grasp the broader social structure that shaped these ventures. At the top of Viking society stood the Jarls, the noble class. These were the wealthy and powerful leaders, the chieftains who commanded vast territories and fleets. The Jarl was not just a political leader, but a military figure as well, responsible for the safety and prosperity of the Viking community. A Jarl would lead raids, organize trade missions, and oversee the logistics of long voyages. The Viking Jarl was a figure of prestige and authority, but also one who had to maintain the loyalty of his warriors and the support of his people. This meant that the Jarl needed to demonstrate not only military prowess but also generosity and leadership, ensuring that his crew and followers were well taken care of and motivated to follow him on perilous journeys. In addition to their military duties, Jarls also wielded significant influence in Viking trade and politics. They often acted as intermediaries between their people and other cultures, whether they were trading furs with the Byzantines or negotiating with other Nordic tribes. In this capacity, the Jarl was often expected to forge alliances, broker deals, and navigate the complex web of relationships that were essential to Viking success. A well-respected Jarl could have an enormous impact on Viking seafaring, enabling his warriors to embark on far-reaching raids or establish thriving trading routes that spanned from the Mediterranean to the shores of North America. Beneath the Jarls were the carls, the free farmers, craftsmen, and warriors who formed the backbone of Viking society. These individuals, often described as the middle class of the Vikings, were the ones who manned the ships, raised the crops, and crafted the tools and weapons that made their civilization so formidable. The carls were not bound by the constraints of serfdom. They had land and could accumulate wealth, but they were still subject to the authority of the Jarl or local leaders. When it came to seafaring, the carls were the ones who sailed into battle, fought in raids, and helped to expand Viking influence across Europe and beyond. They were skilled seamen, often raised from childhood to navigate the unpredictable seas and fight in close-quarter combat on the ships. For a Viking carl, joining a raid or embarking on a trading expedition was often a matter of honor and necessity. Their position in society meant they were expected to contribute to the prosperity and survival of their community. While the carls could own land and enjoy a certain degree of autonomy, their loyalty to their Jarl was essential. In return, they enjoyed the spoils of victory, whether that was land gained through conquest, trade goods, or simply the thrill of adventure and the accumulation of wealth. A carl might have his own home and family, but when called upon he would take up his axe, board the longship, and venture out into the world on behalf of his community. Below the carls in Viking society were the thralls, the enslaved class. Thralls were often captured during raids, purchased, or born into servitude. They were the lowest in the social hierarchy and had no personal freedom. Most of the time, thralls worked the land, tended to the animals, or performed manual labor within Viking settlements. Their lives were hard, and while they had little agency, they were still essential to the functioning of Viking society. Though their role may seem subordinate, the thralls' labor was crucial to the economy of the Vikings. They provided the necessary support that allowed the carls to focus on military and trade activities. When it came to seafaring, thralls played an important but often overlooked role. They were the ones who worked behind the scenes, maintaining the ships, preparing food, and assisting with other vital tasks. They were not likely to engage in battle or sail on long voyages, but their contribution ensured that the warriors and traders could focus on their missions. Their work was often grueling and thankless, but it was indispensable. In some cases, thralls could be freed after a certain period or could even buy their freedom, but for the most part, their status remained subjugated throughout their lives. Viking society was deeply collaborative, especially when it came to embarking on long voyages. Each person had a role to play, and the success of the voyage depended on everyone performing their duties effectively. The jarls provided the leadership and resources, the carls provided the labor and military might, and the thralls ensured the upkeep of the ships and settlement. The Vikings understood the necessity of each role, and their success on the high seas was a result of the efficient coordination between these different social classes. One of the most fascinating aspects of Viking seafaring communities was their deep-rooted belief in kinship and loyalty. Family ties were paramount, and the Vikings were known for their close-knit communities, where loyalty to one's kin was a central value. This loyalty extended not just to the family unit, but also to the broader Viking community. Whether sailing on a raid or embarking on a trade expedition, Vikings worked together, supported each other, and fought side by side. This sense of unity was integral to their success, as the Vikings faced incredible hardships on their voyages. There was no room for dissent or disloyalty among the crew. If a warrior failed to uphold his honor or abandon his comrades during a battle, it was considered a grave offense, punishable by exile or death. The concept of honor was central to Viking culture, and it governed much of their social interactions, particularly within the context of seafaring. Honor was earned through bravery, loyalty, and skill. The most respected warriors, the skalds, poets, and bards, would recount the exploits of these warriors in song, ensuring that their names and deeds were immortalized for future generations. To be seen as honorable, a Viking needed to demonstrate his worthiness in battle, but also through his interactions with his comrades. The bonds formed at sea were often just as strong as those formed on land. On long voyages, where survival was never guaranteed, the need to trust and rely on one another was paramount. Viking seafaring communities were also marked by their belief in fate and destiny. The concept of wird, or fate, was central to Viking spirituality, and it shaped their worldview. They believed that the gods, particularly Odin, controlled their fates, and that every Viking warrior had a destined path to follow. This belief in fate was reflected in their seafaring endeavors. Whether embarking on a raid or a trading mission, the Vikings believed that their success or failure was determined by the gods. This sense of fate instilled in them a sense of determination and fearlessness, for they knew that their actions were part of a larger, cosmic plan. The social structure of Viking seafaring communities was both hierarchical and collaborative, a blend of individual responsibility and collective action. Each member of the community, from the jarl to the thrall, had a role to play in ensuring the success of their voyages. This structure, built on a foundation of loyalty, honor, and shared responsibility, was key to the Vikings' ability to navigate the treacherous seas, raid foreign lands, and build trade networks that spanned across continents. In the end, the Vikings' social structure was not just about power and authority, it was about creating a tightly knit, resilient community that could withstand the harshest of challenges and rise to meet the call of the open sea. Viking seafarers, long celebrated for their ferocity in battle and audacity in exploration, possessed an extraordinary set of navigational skills that allowed them to conquer not only the known world but also venture into realms that few had dared to explore. These skills were the product of centuries of trial and error, learning from nature, and refining techniques passed down through generations. For the Vikings, navigation was not just a matter of moving from one point to another, it was a way of life, deeply embedded in their culture, survival, and their drive to explore the uncharted corners of the earth. Navigating the vast and treacherous oceans of the North Atlantic, across icy waters to the distant shores of North America, was no simple feat. The Vikings, with their unyielding spirit and unparalleled ingenuity, developed methods and tools that allowed them to traverse these seas with impressive precision, despite the lack of modern instruments. The heart of Viking navigation lay in their intimate relationship with nature. Unlike the navigators of later centuries, who would rely on compasses and charts, the Vikings used the natural world around them, stars, the sun, the wind, and even the animals they encountered, to guide their way. This deep knowledge of the natural environment was passed down through oral traditions, where the teachings of experienced sailors were shared with younger generations. It was not a formalized system, but rather a skill honed through practice and an intrinsic understanding of the elements. One of the most remarkable aspects of Viking navigation was their ability to navigate by the sun, even in the often overcast and unpredictable skies of the North Atlantic. The Vikings utilized a device known as a sunstone, a crystal that, when held at the right angle, could help to detect the sun's position even on cloudy days. The sunstone worked by polarizing light, allowing sailors to find the direction of the sun's rays. While the exact nature of the Viking sunstone remains a subject of debate, evidence suggests that it was a powerful tool that allowed them to maintain their course even when the sky was obscured. This ability to navigate by the sunstone made the Vikings exceptionally skilled at finding their way, even when the weather was less than cooperative. In addition to the sunstone, the Vikings were experts at using the stars to guide their journeys. They followed the ancient tradition of stellar navigation, relying on constellations such as the Big Dipper and the North Star, Polaris, to determine their position and direction. The North Star, which is located nearly directly above the North Pole, would have been a reliable reference point for the Vikings, allowing them to maintain a steady course in the northern latitudes. They also used the sun's position relative to the time of day to estimate their latitude, making them particularly adept at estimating their location in the vast expanses of the ocean. The Vikings also had an exceptional understanding of ocean currents and tides, which they used to their advantage when navigating the waters. They would take note of the direction of the currents and use them to plan their journeys, ensuring that they were sailing with the flow of the water rather than against it. This knowledge of oceanography allowed them to take more direct routes, conserving both time and energy. The Vikings were also well versed in reading the winds, knowing how to harness the power of the wind to sail efficiently and avoid the pitfalls of turbulent waters. The ability to read the wind patterns and currents was crucial, particularly when sailing on open water where landmarks were scarce, and the environment could change rapidly. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of Viking navigation was their ability to sail across vast distances without the benefit of modern tools like maps or compasses. To do so, the Vikings relied on a combination of techniques, including dead reckoning, where they would estimate their position based on their previous speed and direction. They would also use landmarks when possible, navigating by the shape of the coastline or the color of the sea, noting changes in the water's hue as they approached land. When sailing through the fog or stormy weather, the Vikings relied on their accumulated experience, using their knowledge of oceanic patterns to guide them forward. But navigation was not simply about understanding the natural world. It was also about understanding the technology of their ships. Viking longships, the iconic vessels that allowed them to dominate the seas, were designed with precision for these very purposes. Their sleek, shallow hulls allowed them to navigate both deep and shallow waters, while their sails and oars allowed for greater maneuverability and speed. The longship's ability to sail into the wind, a technique known as tacking, was revolutionary and allowed the Vikings to cover long distances quickly, even when they encountered headwinds. This adaptability made them formidable opponents on the water and allowed them to explore regions far beyond their homeland. Viking seafaring communities also understood the importance of collaboration when it came to navigation. A typical longship was manned by a crew of sailors who worked together, using their combined skills to guide the ship across the open sea. Each member of the crew played a role, from the steersman at the rear, who was responsible for keeping the ship on course, to the rowers, who powered the ship through the water. Navigation was often a collective effort, with everyone contributing their knowledge of the sea, the sky, and the landscape. This teamwork was crucial to the success of their voyages and allowed the Vikings to navigate treacherous waters with a sense of unity and purpose. One of the most impressive demonstrations of Viking navigation came with their voyages to North America. Viking explorers like Leif Erikson and his crew are believed to have sailed across the North Atlantic to the shores of what is now Newfoundland, Canada, around the year 1000, almost 500 years before Columbus set foot in the New World. This achievement was nothing short of remarkable, considering the vastness of the ocean and the lack of navigational aids that we take for granted today. The Vikings did not have detailed maps, but they relied on their deep understanding of the sea, the stars, and the weather to guide them across these uncharted waters. Viking navigators also knew how to read the signs of nature to determine their position. They understood the migration patterns of birds, the direction of ocean swells, and the behavior of marine life. The presence of certain birds, for example, signaled the proximity of land, while the types of fish found in specific areas could help them determine how far from shore they were. This intimate connection with the natural world allowed the Vikings to navigate confidently through unfamiliar waters, relying on their knowledge of nature's patterns to guide them forward. For the Vikings, navigation was not just a technical skill, it was a worldview. Their ability to read the sea, the sky, and the environment around them was central to their identity as seafarers. It was a skill rooted in observation, tradition, and experience, passed down through generations. Every voyage, whether for trade, exploration, or war, required not only the courage to face the unknown but also the wisdom to read the subtle signs of the natural world. Their legacy of navigation endures to this day, inspiring modern sailors and navigators who continue to look to the stars, the wind, and the sea for guidance. In conclusion, Viking navigation was an art form, a unique blend of environmental knowledge, practical skill, and technological innovation. Their ability to navigate the vast and dangerous seas, using only the natural world and their ships, is a testament to their ingenuity and determination. The Vikings were not merely warriors or traders, they were master navigators, capable of traversing the oceans with a remarkable degree of accuracy and confidence. Their methods, though ancient, were sophisticated and ahead of their time, enabling them to explore lands that were beyond the reach of most of the world's seafarers. The Vikings' legacy of navigation continues to inspire awe and admiration, serving as a reminder of the incredible feats of endurance and knowledge that these remarkable seafarers achieved. The Vikings are often remembered as fearsome raiders and ruthless conquerors, but their impact on the regions they attacked and settled was far more profound than simple pillaging. Their influence extended far beyond their violent raids, as they played an integral role in shaping the cultures, economies, and societies of the lands they encountered. From the British Isles to France, the Mediterranean, and even parts of Russia, the Vikings left their mark in ways that went far beyond warfare. Through their invasions, settlements, and trade networks, they transformed the places they touched, creating lasting legacies that have echoed through the centuries. When the Vikings first set sail from their Scandinavian homelands, they were driven by a combination of factors, including the need for resources, land, and the desire to gain fame and fortune. However, their raids were not just aimed at destruction, they were part of a larger process of cultural exchange, where both the Vikings and the people they encountered contributed to the creation of something new. Over time, the Viking presence in these lands shifted from mere plundering to settlement and integration, as the raiders became settlers, traders, and rulers. One of the most significant areas where the Vikings made their mark was in the British Isles. The Viking Age began in 793, when the Vikings raided the monastery at Lindisfarne, a wealthy and remote Christian site off the northeastern coast of England. This attack marked the beginning of a series of Viking raids that would devastate much of the British Isles over the next 2 centuries. However, the Vikings did not just raid and pillage. They also laid the groundwork for lasting cultural and political changes. The Vikings established what became known as the Danelaw in England, a region in the north and east of the country where Viking rule was established. The Danelaw was not merely a military conquest, it was a cultural blending of Viking and Anglo-Saxon traditions. Viking law, language, and customs influenced the local populations in profound ways. Old Norse words were absorbed into the English language, particularly in the areas of law, governance, and everyday life. Towns and settlements with names derived from Old Norse, such as York, Derby, and Nottingham, became central hubs of Viking influence in England. In fact, York, known as Jorvik in Viking times, became a thriving Viking city and a major center of trade in the North Sea region. The Viking influence on the English language is still evident today. Many common English words, such as sky, egg, window, and law, come from Old Norse. The Vikings also contributed to the development of legal and governmental systems, with their own system of justice, which was often based on oral traditions and assemblies. This system influenced the development of English common law, particularly in the way disputes were resolved and how governance was structured. Beyond their linguistic and legal contributions, the Vikings also transformed the British Isles in terms of their architecture, farming practices, and trade networks. They introduced new techniques in shipbuilding, which allowed for the construction of sturdier and more efficient vessels for trade and transport. Viking settlements were typically built in strategic locations, often along rivers or coasts, facilitating trade with other parts of Europe and beyond. The Vikings established trading routes that stretched from the British Isles to the Byzantine Empire and the Arab world, creating a vast network of commercial exchange that spanned continents. In addition to England, the Vikings also had a profound impact on France, particularly in the region that became known as Normandy. In the 9th century, Viking raids on France were relentless, with raids along the Seine River and attacks on major cities such as Paris. However, the Vikings' relationship with the French evolved over time. In 911, the Viking leader Rollo was granted land by the French king Charles the Simple, and in exchange, Rollo agreed to defend France from other Viking raids. This land became the Duchy of Normandy, which was ruled by the descendants of Rollo, and it would go on to play a pivotal role in European history. The Viking influence on Normandy was significant. Rollo and his descendants adopted many aspects of French culture, including the French language and Christianity, but they also retained their Viking identity. The Normans, as they came to be known, became a powerful force in medieval Europe, with their most famous descendant, William the Conqueror, invading England in 1066. The Normans brought with them Viking customs, such as their use of the longship and their distinctive military tactics, which played a key role in their success. Normandy's Viking heritage would later be felt in England and beyond, as the Normans spread their influence throughout Europe. The Vikings also had a lasting impact on the Mediterranean world. Viking raids reached as far as the southern coast of Italy and the Iberian Peninsula. However, the most significant Viking interactions with the Mediterranean came through their involvement in the Byzantine Empire and the Arab world. Viking warriors, known as Varangians, served as mercenaries in the Byzantine Empire, where they formed the elite Varangian Guard, a group of bodyguards for the emperor. These Vikings were highly prized for their martial prowess and loyalty, and they played a significant role in Byzantine military campaigns. The Vikings' interactions with the Arab world were also notable. Through their trade networks, the Vikings were able to connect with the Islamic world, particularly in places like Spain and North Africa. They exchanged goods such as furs, slaves, and precious metals, and in return, they brought back items such as silk, spices, and other luxury goods. These interactions helped to foster a cultural exchange between the Vikings and the Arab world, influencing everything from Viking art to their understanding of astronomy and navigation. The Vikings also had a significant impact on Eastern Europe, particularly in what is now Russia and Ukraine. The Varangians, who were Scandinavians from Sweden, established the powerful state of Kievan Rus in the 9th and 10th centuries. This early Slavic kingdom was founded by Viking warriors who began to settle along the rivers of Eastern Europe. The Varangians traded extensively with the Byzantine Empire and other civilizations, and they played a key role in the spread of Christianity to the region. The legacy of the Vikings in Russia can still be seen in the names of many towns and cities, such as Novgorod and Kiev, which were founded by Scandinavian settlers. The influence of Viking governance and military strategy also helped to shape the early history of Russia, laying the foundation for the rise of the Russian state. While the Vikings' impact on these regions is often remembered for their military conquests and raids, it is important to recognize that their influence was also one of cultural exchange, trade, and settlement. The Vikings were not just warriors, they were also traders, explorers, and settlers who helped to bridge the gap between disparate cultures. They introduced new technologies, ideas, and customs that would shape the course of European and world history for centuries to come. In conclusion, the Vikings' impact on the lands they raided and settled was profound and multifaceted. They were agents of change, leaving behind a legacy of cultural exchange, political transformation, and economic development that would shape the history of Europe and beyond. Their raids may have been violent and destructive, but the Vikings also brought with them innovation, trade, and new ways of thinking. Whether through their influence on the British Isles, the establishment of Normandy, their mercenary service in the Byzantine Empire, or their role in the rise of Kievan Rus, the Vikings were not simply conquerors. They were creators of new worlds, blending their own traditions with those of the lands they encountered, and shaping the course of history in the process. The Vikings, like many ancient cultures, held a complex and deeply ingrained belief system that governed their worldview, behavior, and their approach to life on the sea. Their spiritual beliefs were rooted in Norse mythology, a pantheon of gods, creatures, and legends that shaped their understanding of the natural world, their destiny, and the very essence of their existence. For the Vikings, the sea was not merely a physical space to traverse but a domain that was intimately connected with their spiritual beliefs. The harsh, unpredictable nature of the ocean, as well as the perilous journeys they undertook, were seen through a lens of myth, fate, and divine influence. Their beliefs about the sea and their relationship with the gods played a critical role in shaping Viking seafaring culture and, by extension, their legendary voyages and raids. At the heart of Viking spiritual life was their belief in the Aesir and Vanir, two distinct groups of gods who ruled over different aspects of existence. The Aesir were associated with power, war, and order, while the Vanir were linked to nature, fertility, and wisdom. The most well-known of the Viking gods, such as Odin, Thor, and Freya, were part of the Aesir, each embodying aspects of power, courage, and destiny that resonated with the Viking seafaring culture. Odin, the All-Father, was particularly revered, as he was not only the god of war but also the god of wisdom and the dead. His role as the god of death, in particular, resonated with the Vikings, who lived lives that were often cut short by the dangers of warfare or treacherous sea voyages. Odin was believed to guide the souls of the fallen warriors to Valhalla, his great hall, where they would fight, feast, and prepare for the final battle at Ragnarok, the end of the world. This belief gave the Vikings a unique understanding of death, one that was not to be feared but embraced, particularly for those who died in battle or on long, dangerous voyages. This view of death as a transition, rather than an end, provided a source of courage for Viking warriors, knowing that their valor would ensure their place in Odin's hall, where they would join the ranks of fallen heroes for eternity. In addition to Odin, Thor, the god of thunder and lightning, was another central figure in Viking spirituality. Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, was seen as a symbol of protection and strength, and it played an important role in Viking seafaring. Thor was often invoked by Vikings before setting sail on a voyage, as it was believed that his hammer could ward off the dangers of the sea, including storms, monsters, and other supernatural threats. The belief that Thor would protect them during their seafaring expeditions provided the Vikings with a sense of security and courage as they faced the uncertain and often violent nature of the ocean. Thor's importance in Viking seafaring culture is also reflected in the numerous runestones and artifacts bearing images of his hammer, as well as the many place names derived from his name, such as Thura and Thorshavn. Freyr, another key god in Viking mythology, was associated with fertility, prosperity, and the natural world. He was the god of the harvest, and his favor was sought for bountiful crops and smooth sailing. In Viking society, Freyr was often called upon during significant events such as longship launches, which were believed to be blessed by the gods to ensure the ship's success in battle and its safe return. His connection to the natural world and the harvest also made him a god of peace, which stood in contrast to the violent, warlike deities of Odin and Thor. As the god of the elements, Freyr's favor was believed to bring calm seas and favorable winds, making him a crucial figure for Viking sailors as they ventured into unknown and treacherous waters. The Vikings' understanding of the natural world was also influenced by a pantheon of lesser-known deities and spirits, such as Njord, the god of the sea and winds. Njord was believed to control the seas and was revered by Viking sailors for his power to bring favorable winds and calm waters. In fact, many Viking seafarers made offerings to Njord before setting sail, hoping for his favor. His daughter, the goddess Skadi, was associated with winter and hunting, and her influence was invoked when embarking on voyages during the colder months, when the seas could be even more perilous. But the Vikings' beliefs were not confined to the gods alone. They also held a deep respect for the forces of nature, including the sea itself, which they considered to be both a powerful and capricious entity. The sea was not only a place of danger but also of immense beauty and mystery. This reverence for the sea was embodied in their spiritual practices, which included rituals, sacrifices, and prayers to appease the spirits of the water and the creatures that inhabited it. One such ritual involved the offering of animals, weapons, and other valuable items to the sea, in hopes that the gods and spirits would grant safe passage and protect them from the unknown dangers lurking beneath the waves. For the Vikings, the sea was not just a physical obstacle to be overcome. It was a realm where the supernatural and the mundane intersected. Myths and stories were told of sea monsters and supernatural beings that could either help or hinder a voyage. Some believed in the Kraken, a giant sea monster capable of dragging entire ships into the depths of the ocean, while others believed in Selkies, shape-shifting creatures that lived in the water and were capable of both aiding and deceiving sailors. The Vikings also believed in Veatir, the spirits of nature, who could either protect or threaten seafarers depending on how they were treated. These beliefs shaped the Vikings' understanding of the sea as a dynamic, living entity, filled with both danger and possibility. The Vikings' seafaring rituals were deeply tied to their spiritual beliefs, and they were designed to ensure the safety and success of a voyage. Before setting sail, a Viking crew might gather in a sacred place, offer prayers, and perform sacrifices to the gods, asking for their favor and protection on the journey ahead. These rituals would often involve pouring libations of mead or blood onto the ground, symbolizing the offering of life in exchange for safe passage. The ship itself was considered a sacred vessel, and its launch would be accompanied by rituals to consecrate it to the gods. The Vikings believed that the ship was more than just a means of transportation. It was a vessel that carried them into the realm of the divine, connecting them with their gods and the supernatural forces that governed the sea. As the Vikings ventured farther from their homelands, their beliefs about the sea and the gods remained a constant source of guidance and inspiration. They believed that their success on the high seas was not solely the result of their own skill and bravery but was also determined by the will of the gods. This divine connection gave the Vikings a unique sense of purpose and destiny as they sailed into the unknown, facing dangers that could have crushed lesser cultures. Their belief in their gods, combined with their unmatched seafaring abilities, made them formidable explorers and conquerors, able to reach lands that had been out of reach for centuries. In the Viking world, the sea was not just a physical barrier to overcome but a spiritual force to be understood and respected. Their rituals, beliefs, and reverence for the gods imbued their voyages with meaning and purpose, and their spiritual connection to the sea played a key role in their success as seafarers. As the Vikings crossed vast distances, from the frigid waters of the North Atlantic to the warm shores of the Mediterranean, their faith in their gods and their ability to navigate the treacherous seas gave them a sense of invincibility that set them apart from other cultures of the time. It was this spiritual belief, intertwined with their extraordinary seafaring abilities, that made the Vikings the legendary explorers and warriors we remember today. The Viking longship, with its sleek, narrow hull and ability to navigate both open seas and shallow rivers, stands as one of the most iconic and successful feats of maritime engineering in history. While the Viking warriors are often remembered for their fierce raids and conquests, it is their mastery of shipbuilding that truly enabled them to become the unstoppable force they were on the seas. Their vessels were not merely tools for travel, they were symbols of innovation, craftsmanship, and practicality, designed to conquer the many challenges of seafaring life. The ingenuity of Viking shipbuilding helped them cover vast distances, raid foreign shores, establish trade routes, and even explore lands as far away as North America, all of which would have been impossible without their exceptional maritime technology. Viking ships, primarily the longship, Drakkar, were the result of centuries of refinement, combining expert knowledge of materials, design, and the unforgiving demands of the open ocean. Unlike the bulky, slow vessels used by other civilizations, Viking longships were designed for speed, agility, and versatility. These ships were long, narrow, and lightweight, with a shallow draft that allowed them to sail in shallow waters, navigate rivers, and land on beaches, enabling the Vikings to strike swiftly and disappear just as quickly. Their ability to maneuver with precision was a crucial advantage, whether in battle or when exploring unknown lands. The longship was crafted from oak, a wood known for its durability and strength. Vikings were master shipbuilders who meticulously selected trees that could provide the necessary length and flexibility for their vessels. The planks used for the hull were thin and flexible, allowing them to bend and flex with the waves, preventing them from cracking under the pressure of heavy seas. This flexibility also meant the ships could survive violent storms or unexpected collisions, ensuring that they were both durable and agile. To prevent leaks, the planks were tightly sewn together using iron rivets and wooden dowels, creating a tight seal that was waterproof. The hull was then coated in pitch, a substance derived from pine resin, which further protected it from the elements. The keel, the backbone of the ship, was a vital part of Viking shipbuilding. It ran the length of the boat and provided stability, helping the ship maintain its course even in rough waters. The longship's design incorporated a symbiotic relationship between the hull, the keel, and the rest of the structure, allowing for optimal performance. The keel was often reinforced with additional timber to add strength, making the ships resilient to wear and tear. This combination of flexibility, strength, and stability made the longship one of the most advanced vessels of its time, capable of navigating diverse environments, from the icy waters of the North Atlantic to the tranquil rivers of Eastern Europe. One of the most striking features of Viking longships was their symmetrical design. The ships were built with identical bow and stern, meaning that the ship could sail forwards or backwards without needing to turn around. This was an invaluable feature during naval combat or when docking in unfamiliar harbors, as the Vikings could quickly change direction without the need for complicated maneuvers. It allowed them to approach shorelines quickly, launch surprise attacks, and then retreat just as swiftly, leaving their enemies with little time to react. This maneuverability was a defining characteristic of Viking naval warfare, and it made the longship a formidable weapon on the seas. The longship's speed and maneuverability were also a result of the sail and oar system. The Vikings used a combination of both wind and muscle power to propel their ships, which gave them greater control over their speed and direction. The longships were equipped with a single square sail, which was made of wool or linen and was rigged to a central mast. When the wind was favorable, the sail could catch the wind and propel the ship forward, allowing for long-distance travel without the constant labor of rowing.